Hello everyone, and good afternoon to everyone. So I'm Aqua. I'm going to be the moderator for today's forum. So first and foremost, I'd like to say thank you to the panelists to come and meet the Malaysian Student Association MASA members today. This is the first time that we have such event. So I hope everyone is excited to hear what the panelists have to say today. Secondly, I want to thank the audience again for showing their commitment to come despite the NFC Championship game that is going on now. But fret not, hopefully we can catch the AFC Championship game after this. So hopefully it's a good compromise for all of us. So first and foremost, I would like to invite the panelists, YB Hannah and Dr. Kai, to come forward and take their place. So let me introduce the speakers and the panelists first. So our first speaker for today is Dr. Kai Ostwald. He's an assistant professor at Institute of Asian Research and Department of Political Science. He's also the co-director for Center for South Asian Research, and he has spent a lot of time working and studying in Southeast Asia, especially in Malaysia and Singapore. Our second speaker for today is Dr. Terence Gomez. Although he cannot physically be here, but he's here with us. That's the most important thing. So, Dr. Gomez is a professor at the Department of Administrative Studies and Politics at University of Malaya. He also spent a lot of time doing research with the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development in Geneva, Switzerland. He has a very interesting story with the UM administration when he was about to go to the UN to take the position as the director of the research. So hopefully he can share the story with us today in the forum. Our third speaker is YB Hannah Yeoh. She's a state assemblywoman for Subang Jaya, Selangor, and she obtained her Bachelor of Laws from University of Tasmania in Australia. She's also the first woman speaker in the country. And she's today with her husband, Mr. Ram, who's an IT entrepreneur. So anybody who's interested in IT, maybe can talk to Mr. Ram personally after this. So that's our panelists for today, and welcome to Seattle. I hope you enjoy your stay in Seattle so far. So let me summarize and explain the structure of the forum before we begin. So there are going to be three parts in this forum. So the first part is a general question. I'll pose a general question that you guys have to answer. You guys have 5 minutes to answer the question. I mean, we are not trying to be restrictive.
Sounds like a quiz show.
Okay. But yeah, feel free to add anything that you want to add apart from the questions that I posed. And then the second part will have a specific questions because you guys have a very diversified background in terms of what you guys are doing in your research. So we want to benefit more from that, and I'll ask questions specifically related to your area of expertise. Last but not least, we're going to have a Q&A for the forum and as well as for Dr. Hishman's speech just now. In terms of timing, we're going to have Zuri to be the timekeeper. So for the first session, we're going to have the 5-minute session, and for the second session, the specific questions part, we're going to have 20 minutes. So Zuri will show the green paper to indicate there's 5 minutes remaining, and then 1 minute for the red paper. So again, I would like to reiterate that the question is only just to get the discussion going, but feel free to add anything that you guys feel important for the audience to hear. Because after all, we don't want the discussion to be restricted to the questions that we want to ask. So let's begin. Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
Alright. So the first question. So the political landscape in Malaysia started to change drastically after 2008 general election, and the opposition gained momentum after that and earned more support from the urban voters in 2013. Some people even call it the political tsunami or tsunami politic back in 2008. And even YB Hena started to contest and being involved in politics actively in 2008. But the tsunami politic was 7 years ago, and a lot of things happened in between. So my question is, what has changed and what remains the same? Maybe Dr. Kai can...
Sure. So let me just start by firstly thanking everyone who organized this. It is, I think, a testament to how enthusiastic, how engaged, how curious the youth of today in Malaysia are about politics, that it was possible to organize an event at UBC and then a follow-up event like this a few days later. And I think this is also something that, that is a function of post-2008 politics in Malaysia. So I think we're absolutely right to call 2008 the watershed here in Malaysia for many reasons. When we think about politics in Malaysia prior to 2008, I'm talking contemporary US, politics are dominated by one political faction, right? By UMNO, by Baras. And in that respect, politics in Malaysia pre-2008, I would say, resemble politics in Singapore in some respects today, which is to say, supporting the opposition, voting for the opposition, is really just protesting against the government. A vote for DAP, for PAS, is a protest vote, at least at the national level, against the policies of Baras, but it's not a vote that's meant to change government. If we look at 2008, that significantly, that fundamentally changed. In 2008, we see that it is possible for some political cooperation to happen across three parties, the constituent parties, that are ideologically very dissimilar. With this type of cooperation, it's possible to usher in a new era in politics in Malaysia in many ways. And that era is defined by real alternatives. Now, there are all kinds of questions, we'll get into them, about how credible these alternatives are. But at least in terms of the ballot box, it's possible after 2008 to say, I, as a citizen, speaking on behalf of everyone here, me, can actually make an active choice in what I want to see my government do. That's different from 2008. And I think beyond that, beyond this symbolic change of what it means to participate in politics, we see all manner of practical changes as well. So, for one thing, of course, we see multiple states, state governments fall into the hands of Pakatan, and that gives the opposition an opportunity to put in place some of its ideas, to actually practice them, to exercise governance in a way that they couldn't do before, purely theoretical before. That's a significant change. But I also think, since the second part of the question was, what has happened since then? We see in some respects, post-2008, this massive upswelling of hope and of engagement. That leads us up to the months prior to GE13, where there was the real sense on the ground that something really big could be happening in Malaysia. And the result, as we all know, is that in terms of the popular vote, Pakatan Rakyat did very well, but because of institutional features in Malaysia's political system, it wasn't able to take power. My fear is that we have something called relative deprivation. We have this hope in a new future, this hope in being able to change the political environment that wasn't manifested in 2013, despite so many conditions being in favor of it. But what we might have in the wake of that is a lot of disappointment and disillusionment with politics. In some respects, if we're pessimistic about it, it's almost as though there is a full circle. There is this great groundswell of optimism. And then, following that, this quite significant letdown and this uncertainty about what's next. And the months, the years since 2013, since GE 2013, are are symbolic of that. I think a lot of what's happened in the past year in Malaysia is worrying, is troubling to a lot of observers and to a lot of Malaysians, as it should be. One thing I should say at this point too, down to 1 minute, the conversations we'll have today, the discussions and some of the criticisms will sound very harsh, and they will be very critical of politics in Malaysia. And I think that's right, and I think it's right for one reason, and that is that if we look at Malaysia relative to a lot of other countries that were similar positions in the 1950s and 1960s, Malaysia is one of the success stories of the world in terms of development. It has done an incredible job building human capacity. It's done an incredible job in many dimensions of developing its population in its country. And that, I think, requires that we hold it politically to very high standards. And those are standards that, in the last year especially, I don't think have been met.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Kai. I think Dr. Kai mentioned a very important point that the opposition starts to gain a few states in Malaysia and they can start implementing what kind of policy they want. So, despite there are many issues in our general election about malapportionment and gerrymandering, which we'll talk later in the specific questions. So, Wabihana, what is your response to the question? Maybe speaking from a political party side.
Okay, good afternoon everybody. I got involved in politics in the 12th general elections, year 2008, when I was asked to contest 2 weeks before nomination day. So I didn't come from a political background. I was trained as a lawyer, worked 3 years as a lawyer, and then I went into event management and then jumped into politics. When I was 22 years old, like you, some of you, I was not interested in politics. I would never come for a forum like this. Even if they have no football, I will not come. So that tells me a lot about how informed the young people are today. And it's becoming very, very difficult for the government to try to brainwash or even to try to influence how young people think. I think it's very, very difficult now because people are very, very informed. So I came from that background. Didn't want to stay back in Malaysia, wanted to migrate. Studied in Australia, applied for PR, got a job but couldn't get PR. My father said come home, so I went home. And gradually, started work, and that's how I ended becoming interested in politics at the age of 28. So even though I could vote at the age of 21, I never bothered to register, and I only registered in year 2007, just 1 year before the general elections. Yeah. What's different between 12 general elections and 13 general elections? I can only share from my experience. Yeah. 12 general election in year 2008, there was no Pakatan Rakyat. Okay, even though people want to believe that there was Pakatan Rakyat, I can tell you now as a candidate, there was no Pakatan Rakyat. It was just a loose opposition coalition. Okay, at that time when I was campaigning, I was told never to appear with PAS. Why? Because the DAP was very afraid of being associated with PAS based on their previous experience, where a lot of our senior leaders lost the election when they wanted to combine forces. Because of that, I remember during Ceramah, we could appear with PKR. There was Nurul Izzat and the rest, but no PAS flags can be seen near us. So we were told never be photographed with a PAS flag or PAS banner. So we were just contesting in 2008 general elections, hoping to form a stronger opposition. Just wanted to deny them of, because K. Toyo as the Menteri Besar then wanted zero opposition in Selangor. At the time we had 2 seats, 2 belonging to DAP, the rest all UMNO, so the rest all Barisan Nasional. So when we campaigned, we wanted stronger opposition. The difference now in last year 2013, there was already Pakatan Rakyat, and people were already judging us based on our history of governance in Selangor, in Perak for a very short time, and also in Kelantan and in Penang and Kedah. Okay, so people had a greater option when they went to vote year 2013, and also 2013 you had more young people voting. So that was the biggest difference, and also the use of smartphone. Year 2008, Facebook was still not very popular. It was not used as a tool to campaign. People were mainly relying on blogs. I remember a lot of people going to Raja Petra's blog, logging in just to find out where's the ceramah, what's the group. And I remember so well because there was no WhatsApp at the time. Okay? So senior citizens would come up to me and say what a great sacrifice they're paying, SMSing to 500 people, sending SMS to 500 people to tell them about ceramah. But 2013, you had WhatsApp, so easy to send out information and it's free, so everybody was communicating freely. And so the use of social media became very powerful year 2013. So I think that's the two biggest difference. There's now Pakatan Rakyat and people can now go, whether they like it or not, they have a choice. BN or PR. In most places, they can decide who to vote for. Yeah.
Right, thank you, YB Hannah. Dr. Gomez, your response on what has changed since 2008 and what remains the same? What remains the same?
At that time, UMNO realized that it was important for them to muster as much Chinese support or non-Malay support as possible. So after 1990, what you see Barisan Nasional doing, Mahathir in particular, he introduced Vision 2020 and he talked about a Bangsa Malaysia. He liberalized education, culture, and even began to support non-Malay businesses. This was a major change. In 1995, Mahathir or the Barisan Nasional registered its best ever victory. 65% of the popular vote. Best ever, even till today they have not bypassed that. That support they got was primarily due to a massive Chinese swing. Indian support was already there. But Malay support at that time diminished. This is interesting, that Mahathir, although now he had got enormous Chinese support, was losing Malay support. In fact, in his own seat in 1982, Mahathir had 60% of Malay support. By 1986 it was 87%, by 1990 it was 53%. It just kept falling year after year. In 1999, we had the Reformasi. The Reformasi is very interesting because for the first time in our history, Barisan Alternative was formed, which comprised PAS, DAP, and a new party, Keadilan, Anwar's party. What is interesting is that in the 1999 Reformasi, when we expected the Barisan Nasional to do very badly, it was the Barisan Alternative that fared very badly. The main reason for this was many people could not believe that PAS could work with DAP. These were two parties which were so diametrically opposed to each other. And sure enough, after that election in 2001, because of the problems between the PAS and the DAP left the Barisan Alternative. 2004 is very interesting because Abdullah comes in and Abdullah basically hijacks the Reformasi agenda, makes it his own. He talks about major changes, he's going to eradicate corruption, he's going to be an inclusive government, he's going to be a prime minister for all. And the Barisan Nasional wins one of its major victories, 64% of the electoral vote and almost 90% of the seats in parliament. What is interesting for the opposition is this. In 1999, the Reformasi year, Lim Kit Siang and Kapal Singh lost their seats, both the parliamentary seat and state seats. Who would have thought that Kit Siang and Kapal Singh would lose their seats in 1999, the Reformasi year? In 2004, when the Barisan Nasional did very well, 90% of the seats in parliament, the DAP, now out of the Barisan Alternative, got 2 extra seats in parliament. Kapal Singh and Kit Siang were returned to parliament in 2004. 2008 is a very interesting election because, as Hannah just pointed out, the DAP did not have an electoral pact with the Barisan Alternative. The DAP was not seen to be working with PAS in particular. In 2008, because Abdullah did not deliver on the promises that he had made in 2004, he lost badly. There were other reasons too why Barisan Nasional did very badly. It was because also there was factionalism in UMNO, and they lost, because of this factionalism, they lost a lot of seats in the Malay Heartland states. What is important about 2008 is this also. After the election, an electoral pact was made. Pakatan Rakyat was formed after the election. If Pakatan had been formed before the election, I still wonder, I don't think they would have done as well in the 2008 election based on the history that I've just mentioned. So 2008 is extremely interesting because for the first time the opposition had 5 state seats, Pakatan Rakyat had been formed, and now they had a chance to show over the next 5 years whether they could rule as a unified opposition. Interestingly enough, going into the 2013 election, the coalition stayed intact. And we actually thought in 2013 they would do well. I think the only reason why Pakatan didn't do well was because of the way the Pakatan ruled in certain states, in particular Kedah. PAS didn't perform well in Kedah. The reason why they didn't do well also in 2013 is because they had made little inroads in Sabah and in Sarawak, particularly Sabah. If they had done better in Sabah, they probably would have done well. They also didn't do well because the strategies for capturing the South was not good. So these were some of the problems that emerged in 2013. There had to be new institutional reforms. Policy issues were also the reason why UMNO had fallen. UMNO itself was deeply factionalized. They addressed these issues. So these are the key points I think we will need to discuss as we go further into this discussion about politics in Malaysia.
Alright, thank you, Dr. Gomez. I think the point about PAS and DAP having a friction in between them is a very interesting point, and I believe we can ask the question, probably Dr. Gomez can respond, also YB Hannah can respond, speaking in terms of the internal cohesion in Pakatan Rakyat later in the specific questions part. So that's the first part. Hopefully everyone is already warmed up and more excited to hear what the panelists have to say more about our Malaysian politics. So I'll ask the specific questions to Dr. Kai first. So in your recent publication, you talked about malapportionment in the general election in 2013. Can you explain further what malapportionment means and how does it relate to gerrymandering?
Sure. So malapportionment is a concept that, let me take a step back actually. One of the basic norms of democracy is that votes should be of equal importance, of equal influence, right? One person, one vote principle. That's frequently the case in systems that use proportional representation. Systems like the one used in, for example, the United States, in Malaysia, and many other countries called first past the post, there are typically some distortions, which means some votes are worth more than other votes, are more influential than other votes. If we look at Malaysia's electoral system from an international comparison, we see that there is a distortion. What is interesting about the distortion in Malaysia, firstly, is the reason for it, and secondly is the magnitude of it. So in a typical first past the post system, we'll see a difference of a couple percentage points in the number of voters per electoral district. In Malaysia, we see some massive differences. So a really nice example of this is the largest state in the largest electoral district in Malaysia, Kohor, has about 145,000 registered voters. Which is to say, those 145,000 registered voters elect one representative. Not far away from there is, about 50 kilometers, is Putrajaya, another electoral district. This has about 15,000 voters, right? Which means those 15,000 voters elect also one representative. Now, in practical terms, what that means is that one person's vote in Putrajaya has about 9 times the influence of that from someone who lives just 50 kilometers away in right? That's a massive, massive difference. It's a difference on a scale that is almost unheard of if we look anywhere else at systems that use this type of electoral system. So this is fundamentally problematic from the perspective of democratic norms. We have this massive deviation away from the norm of equal influence of votes. Now, there are reasons why we might see different levels of influence for votes, and the Malaysian government will frequently give some very plausible reasons. One is that the lower level of infrastructure in rural areas means that you have to have a smaller number of voters to ensure that representatives can reach out to all constituents equally. Obviously, it's true. In urban areas, it's much easier to maintain contact with constituents than it is in rural areas, right? That's something that's potentially defensible. But if we look very carefully at malapportionment in Malaysia, we see that that's not quite the case. So it is, in fact, the case that rural areas have fewer voters. Rural electoral districts have fewer voters than do urban electoral districts. But there is a huge partisan dimension to this as well. If we compare like to like, which is to say, electoral districts in Pakatan Rakyat that support Pakatan Rakyat versus those that support Barisan Nasional, we see that there is about a 20,000 voter difference, even at equal levels of district density, of voter density. In other words, any defensible reason that we can give doesn't work. There is a massive political bias, partisan bias, in the electoral system of Malaysia that makes it very, very difficult for any party other than coalition, other than Barisan to take power. Now, the consequences of this are very significant, very serious. One is that, of course, Barisan can hold power, can win power, by appealing only to a fairly narrow band of the nation's voters. And it does this. It mobilizes along lines that resonate strongly with a fairly small segment of the population. It knows that if it can win the support of that segment of the population, which is disproportionately influential because of the electoral system, then it can maintain power. Now, on the other hand, for Pakatan Rakyat supporters, I think this is at the root of the disappointment that we see post-2013. In some respects, everything happened the way it was supposed to. And Pakatan Rakyat won by a popular margin of 4%. Now, that's a large margin. If we look at the last 4 presidential elections in the United States, 3 of them were smaller than that. So it's not quite a landslide, but it's not far from a landslide, that 4% margin. And nonetheless, Barisan holds a 20% advantage in seats in parliament. Another way of looking at that is if we look at the seats, the number of seats, the minimum number of seats that Barisan Nasional has to win to maintain control of parliament. That's 112. Right? We have 222 seats in total. And if we arrange the number of seats that Barisan won by the largest margin down to the smallest number, Barisan won that 112th seat by almost 4% of the popular vote. That's a big margin again. Which means that in order for there to be a turnover in power, without major institutional changes, we would have to see a massive, massive landslide towards Pakatan. That is hard to imagine, given how significant the support already was in 2013.
So you talked about how the N can maintain power only to focus on the narrow segment. And personally, I think it is true. Especially, I come from Melaka, which is a very loyal supporter of Barisan Nasional. I mean, I'm not saying I am, but but partisanship aside, still Melaka is a very strong pull for Barisan Nasional. So it points us to the question, because rural areas usually are populated by the Malays, and this points to the question of whether ethnicity has an influence in the general election. And so far we can see that all the governmental policies are also related to ethnicity, as ethnicity is a very central issue in Malaysia. So to what extent ethnicity affect the general election, and also how does ethnicity affect public policy? Does ethnicity influence public policy, or does public policy shapes ethnicity?
I should continue here. Yes. So I think it's an interesting question you raise at the end. Does ethnicity shape public policy or vice versa? The answer is both. The ethnic constellation that we see in Malaysia is a result of public policy, not partisan public policy. It predates partisan, right? This is actually something that Professor Hirschman should be speaking of because he's written very influential papers on this. The MCIO model, right, Malaysian, Chinese, Indian, and other, is very much a colonial model. And it's very much a forced and artificial. When we look at Malaysia today, think that there are 3 constituent ethnicities, or we're told that there are 3 constituent ethnicities in this leftover category. That maybe some validity to that. There are clear differences. We can have some characteristics that we can use to differentiate groups, but that overlooks a massive amount of internal variation. Right? And that's the case for all of the different groups. If we look at the development of what we call the Malay ethnicity, we have influence from many different factors, from many different areas, many different parts of the world. So the ethnic constellation of Singapore, of Malaysia today, sorry, is very much a function of policy. Now, if we look at it the other way around, it's also very clear that ethnicity shapes public policy. And in fact, Malaysia is one of the few countries in the world where I'd say a very large portion of policy is structured along ethnic lines. A different way to say that is public policy is very strongly differentiated along ethnic lines. And we see this in so many different things with education, with the price of real estate, for example, right? With employment, with public and private sector. So there is no question that that ethnicity shapes public policy, and there is also, I think, very little question at this stage that major policy initiatives like the NEP, while they may have had some beneficial components on, the point has been made frequently and very convincingly that that the NEP in its early phase, the first 10 or so years, is responsible largely for the creation of an urban middle class Malay population by providing high quality education to areas that didn't have access to high quality education before. That said, if we look at the current usage of ethnicity in Malaysia, it's quite clear that it is a tool used for electoral gain. The Barisan Nasional has been very successful in mobilizing along ethnic lines, largely through the usage of fear, through a rhetoric, through a narrative that suggests ethnicities, particularly Malayans, the Bumi Putra, are in danger of being overrun by the Dambana, right? And that is not a very healthy political environment. But number two, these policies, in many respects, have also been shown to be quite ineffective in the continued development of Malaysia. Now, Malaysia is at a very key, very important stage in its development. It's a middle-income country. Middle-income countries face middle-income crowds. It's a difficult step to move from a middle-income country to a developed country. The types of inefficiencies that we see through the NEP and through the replacements of the NEP just make it more difficult for Malaysia to make that fight.
And what is your response on the relation between ethnicity and the general election? How does BN use this to influence their chance of winning Putrajaya?
Well, if we take a step back, we can't separate politics from ethnicity when the dominant party is an ethnic party in its own right. The only way to begin moving away from structuring politics along ethnic lines is to move away from race-based political parties, or at least to begin moving away from the idea that only a race-based political party can champion the rights and the needs of a particular community. So there is no question. I think if we look at the election, the campaign run by Prof.Kai and to some extent also by Pakatan focuses strongly on ethnicity and focuses strongly on mobilizing the organization.
Thank you, Dr. Kai. So the next specific questions that I want to ask to Dr. Gomez. So, student activism used to be a normal thing in Malaysia in 1960s. Anwar Ibrahim and Ibrahim Ali are the examples of politicians who used to be so active in politics while they are students. But there seems to be a hiatus in the 70s throughout the 80s period. But now, student activism is starting to emerge again. We hear in the news about Adam Adli in UPSI and also Occupy UM. We recently we hear the news about Fahmi Zainul in UM, where he invited Anwar Ibrahim to speak. And then there was a chaos between the students and the university administration. And students are also protesting about the PTPTN, how the PTPTN scheme is making young people in debt when they come out of college. So my question is to Dr. Gomez, what's the difference and similarities between student activism in the 60s and now, the one that is happening now?
Can I just, before that, answering the question, I must respond to your first question too, because I take a different view from Kai on this matter as to whether, about this link between politics, ethnicity and policies. I want to say this. In 1990, when Mahathir did very badly, he changed policy by introducing Vision 2020 and he brought up the concept of Bangsa Malaysia. It's interesting, he spoke about Bangsa Malaysia for the first time. In 1995, because of that, he did very well. And that was also attributable to a massive swing, as I said earlier, in Chinese support or non-Malay support because for the Barisan Nasional, because they like this idea of a move, an attempt to move away from ethnic-based politics. Mahathir didn't really do it. If you look at Abdullah spoke about Islam Adhari. It was about an inclusive form of Islam as opposed to a more exclusionary form of Islam that PAS was propagating. Immediately, Abdullah got a lot of support because he spoke about inclusiveness, he spoke about an Islam that was different from PAS's kind of Islam. He did very well. He did very badly in 2008 because he did not deliver on his policies. It is also important to note that the first thing that Najib did when he came to power, he spoke about one Malaysia. He spoke about one Malaysia because he recognized that the time had come, society had spoken, they want to move away from ethnic-based politics to a different kind of politics. A politics that was not based on religion and a politics that was not based on ethnicity. He didn't deliver on that, and that's the reason why also he did very badly in 2013. His politics was really racialized, although he talked about one Malaysia. That's why today, even Najib doesn't bother to talk about one Malaysia. And if you look at voting trends, I remember I went to Kedah in 2013, and I asked the people in Kedah in 2013, will you vote for PAS? They said no. And I asked them why, and they said they won't vote for Pakatan and PAS because we didn't like UMNO and their policies, and when we gave PAS a chance, they also didn't deliver on their policies. And I asked them, what kind of policies do you want? And they said, we want policies that address poverty. We are very poor. We want policies that address agriculture, because we have agriculture. We want policies that address education. They were speaking from the position of policies, not ethnicity. If you look at Kelantan, in Kelantan, PAS was doing very well until Abdullah came along in 2004, and he said, I'm going to change policies. I'm going to focus on agriculture. I'm going to help eradicate hardcore poverty. In 2004, Barisan Nasional nearly won Kelantan for the first time since 1990. They lost only by 1 seat. And then they didn't deliver on their policies, and then they lost it again. So there's a serious correlation here between policies and politics. I think we're spending too much time discussing the ethnicity dimension, and that discussion of the ethnicity dimension is not drawing attention to significant changes that have occurred in Malaysian society, especially among the younger generation. The younger generation is not interested in these politics of religion and ethnicity. That seems to be coming true. Now, having said that, let me say a few things on student activism. I want to correct certain point that you made. It is true that in the 1960s, there was a lot of student activism. The student activism was against, because UMNO was not addressing the serious problems that had emerged during British colonial rule. In fact, between 1957 and 1969, nothing much had changed in terms of how the poor, especially rural Malays, had benefited from independence or from UMNO's rule after taking over from the British. And in the 1960s itself, we could see that the students were very active in politics. In fact, they even wanted to run in the 1969 election, but decided against it because there was a move now to remove Tunku, because Tunku Abdul Rahman was not doing much to address serious structural problems in the country. After 1969, it's interesting that it was Anwar who invited Mahathir to speak at the University of Malaya. It was an anti-Tunku rally. And in that rally, it is interesting how the university was closed down. They even switched off the lights so that they could attack. It was the first time, in fact, that the government had moved into the university to prevent discussions in the campus. We are seeing similar trends now in the present period. When they introduced the University and University Colleges Act in 1974, it was important to do that because they knew that the students were still actively protesting against now the Barisan Nasional. There were protests against poverty in Kedah, Bali. There were protests against the poor, the landless people in Johor. So we can see that at that time, by the 1970s, what the government had decided to do is the UUCA, the University Colleges Act, was not effective, so they used the ISA. And that's the time when Anwar and Syed Hussein Ali, the famous academic from the University of Malaya, went to jail. I would like to add, when Mahathir came to power in 1981-82, he talked about a certain liberalization. His key campaign was Bersih Cekap Amanah, clean, efficient, trustworthy. He talked about creating more political space. That was one of the reasons why there was less of student activism at the time, because it's a time of hope, of change. But by 1986-87, it was very clear that Mahathir had become very authoritarian because of the splits in UMNO. And you can see at the time, I was a student at the time, I can tell you now, there was a lot of student activism. It's just that nobody has written much about what happened. In fact, in 1987, there was a big protest by the students also against what was happening in politics. And if you look at the arrest of 106 people under the ISA in 1987, November 1987, many of them were academics, and they had been working with students. All this has not been registered or has not been covered in the literature. That's why we seem to think that there was a lull in the 1980s. There was no lull in the 1980s. In fact, I can say this honestly, that having been a student activist in UM at that time, we were very much involved in many of the problems that were happening in the country. In fact, the leader of the student union at that time was Shabri Chik, the present information minister for UMNO. He switched over to UMNO later. But he was very, in fact, Shabri Chik left the university as an academic to join Tunku Razali Hamza in the opposition, and he only ended up in UMNO because Razali took him into UMNO. So it's important to see that even among the present generation of leaders in the Barisan Nasional, there were student activists who were active in the 1980s. In the present period, to explain why this student activism is this, there's a serious decline in academic standards in the university. Policies like affirmative action allow for weak students to get in. They should not be in the university. The students come out and they have no jobs. The quality of education that they're getting in the university is not good because the quality of academics we have in many of the public universities is just not good. The government went on to create about 20 public universities, and we keep asking ourselves, who are the academics in these 20 public universities? We can barely get enough good academics in the premier university, in the University of Malaya. So the issues about why students are so upset is this: they're getting a university education, so-called, but they cannot get jobs. They cannot get jobs because their degrees are not recognized. The quality of education they are getting is so poor that there's no hope for them in the future. It is for this reason now students are becoming also more active. They're becoming very active because they're recognizing that the government, in spite of serious protests about the quality of education, has not addressed education. In fact, I'd like to make this point too. When the education blueprint was released just recently, it was to address education in the primary and secondary school level. There was no discussion about tertiary education, about reforms in the university. but serious reforms are required in the university. That's why we see the students now extremely upset with as I said, the kind of quality of education that you're getting. But having said all that, I'd like to end by saying this. You can see a persistent trend that students in the university have always been in the forefront of change.
Thank you, Dr. Gomez. So you spoke about how you have a different view about ethnicity and general election. You said that people are very concerned about policies when they make choices about electing people to office. But in recent time, we also see that PR tried to push reforms and policies like GST, and also they had something like turunkan harga kereta and turunkan harga minyak. But it's very hard to push through these kind of policies. So, in your opinion, what is the main problem that caused this issue? Is it because that people are not very informed about what the PR is doing?
No, that's not true. In fact, if you look at the manifestos of both the Barisan Nasional and the Pakatan Rakyat in the last general election, one of the big issues that came up was that there was hardly any difference in the policy manifesto. In fact, when the two manifestos were issued, the big debate was between the Barisan Nasional and the Pakatan Rakyat was whose ideas were these first. There was so little difference. Let me say this also. When in 2008, after the global financial crisis, and when Malaysia was clearly exposed to be stuck in the high middle income trap, it was very clear that they needed a new economic development agenda. Najib came up with a new economic model. When the new economic model was presented in Parliament, the opposition leader, Anwar Ibrahim, rushed out of Parliament, called for a press conference, and he said this: "The ideas in the new economic model are all my ideas." He said that, and we were shocked. But actually, when we looked at it and we thought about it, if you look at the new economic model, many of the ideas were the ideas that in fact Mahathir had introduced when he was in power. And let's not forget that Anwar Ibrahim was Deputy Prime Minister for a long time with Mahathir. It was Abdullah who in fact brought about significant changes. Abdullah, for example, he said, "I'm not interested in big business, I'm interested in small and medium scale enterprises." Abdullah said, "I am going to focus on poverty. I'm not going to focus so much on industrialization, we've done that, but I'm going to focus on poverty. And I'm going to agriculture, and I'm going to focus on agriculture in new ways." So there was a significant shift in policies, and I would argue that Abdullah's policy ideas were in fact quite interesting. The reason why he got so much support in 2004. Why Abdullah didn't deliver is that, and he himself admitted it, if you look at the 9th Malaysia Plan, he said it. In the last chapter of the 9th Malaysia Plan, he points to one big problem he has to address: the public delivery system. In fact, he said, the bureaucracy, I have a problem with the bureaucracy in terms of whether they can deliver all these public policies. Later, he would even complain, there are little Napoleons in government who don't understand how to take these policies and implement them properly. And one of the reasons for Abdullah's failure was not that his policies were bad. In fact, I think his policies were quite good. They were a fundamental shift from Mahathir, but public sector could not deliver. I'd like to say this point too. Najib, when he came to power, when he came up with a new economic model, one of the most significant things he did was to create Pemandu. Pemandu was responsible for taking these policy ideas and helping to implement them and revising them also when necessary. Pemandu was not part of the bureaucracy. Pemandu was under the Prime Minister's office. And the big problem that Najib had was that the bureaucrats did not want to listen to the people in Pemandu. The bureaucrats were not taking the ideas, the policy ideas from Pemandu and implementing them properly. Contestations had emerged between Pemandu and the bureaucrats. The reason why Najib has serious problems also dealing with with the public sector. So these are important things we need to remember. I focus attention on the structure of the state. If you understand the structure of the state, and if you understand the politics that is going on within Pakatan Rakyat, as well as within Barisan Nasional, you'll begin to understand why things are not going right. The problem is not society, I would argue so much. The problem is the state. And in the state, I'm talking both Pakatan Rakyat and also the Barisan Nasional. In Pakatan Rakyat, we have already seen the problem. PAS has got one vision, which is an Islamic state. DAP has got another vision which is more akin with what PKR wants, and there are serious feuding now involving us, DAP and PKR. It's disputing that they have to address. They don't have a common vision. And I would argue, Pakatan Rakyat, because they can't have a common vision, a real alternative vision, they seem to be riding on the Barisan Nasional's policies. That's why there's no real difference in the public policies between the Pakatan Rakyat and the Barisan Nasional. But having said that, let me also say this, the point I made earlier. I think Anwar personally also subscribed to the ideas that the Barisan Nasional is saying, because these are ideas that he himself subscribed to and introduced when he was in power. That's why we see the same policies being replicated. You're right. They do make certain changes. They say, no, we are opposed to GST. They'll talk about the oil revenue issues and so on and so forth. But these are not the kind of public policies that I'm talking about. These are not I'm talking about a model of development which is fundamentally different from what we have.
I also would like to ask another question, going back to the student activism point. So we see in recent time that there is a trend that there are more academicians getting involved in giving political opinion or directly getting involved in politics, like Professor Aziz Bari from UIA, and then Professor Azmi Sharom in So, but there are also many other academicians and professors in Malaysian universities. Some people like to call them Professor Kangkung because they are afraid of criticizing and giving their opinions. So, do you think if we get more academicians voicing their opinions and bringing different ideas to the universities, what would that do to the public education sphere, and how would students react to that?
The first thing we got to do is remember this, as much as I've worked in the University of Yeoh since I've been there as an academic since the 1990s. There are many academics who actually feel the University and University Colleges Act, the UUCA. They are worried that if they do speak up, the UUCA is very clear. Academics cannot be involved in politics. How you interpret that is different. It depends from academic to academic. Many academics feel that if they get involved in politics, it will jeopardize their career. That they cannot move up the academic hierarchy. They cannot get promoted, for example. They feel that the UUCA is very clear that they are not supposed to be involved in politics, and so they refuse to comment political issues. So I think that is one thing that we need to remove from among our legislation. The repeal of the UUCA is imperative. For students, they leave after 4 years, but academics are stuck there. It's their career. I can say this. Many academics who have been critics of the state have found it difficult to get promoted. Their livelihood is affected. I know this for a fact because even I too have been a victim of these kinds of politics. I can talk about it later when we talk about what happened to me in the university. In fact, it's one of the reasons why we see many very academics leaving the university. After a while, they just get tired of the system. There's no room for promotion. Their voice, if can be heard, they do speak up during their lectures. They do deliver exciting lectures. I know I was there. I was privy to some of these exciting lectures. But there is a bar, and they leave. They get tired after a while. It is interesting to note also that some of if you look at the National University of Singapore, the number of Malaysian academics who are there were Malaysians, an interesting large number. If we can get these academics back, that will be a major boon for the university. So academics like Azmi and Aziz, they're not cowed by the legislation. They're not interested. It's just there. They're not going to be cowed by it. And we need more people like them. But unfortunately, many of the good people, as I said, have left, and those who are behind are few and far between. They feel, I have great admiration for them. They feel they're duty bound to stay on and try to bring about change. There is a need. They cannot give in. They cannot cave in to the oppression that they are seeing in the university. And they're going to stand there and fight it out. That's why we have great admiration, as I said, for people like Asmi. He's one of those people that we have seen who's standing there and making his voice heard. He's not the only one. I must say this. We have a small number, not big enough, but we have a small number of academics in all the universities who are doing a fine job trying to give an alternative viewpoint to the students. That's one of the reasons why also students are motivated, because they are seeing these kinds of lecturers coming up, and they themselves also being oppressed, and they're standing in tandem. I want to say one last thing. The recent action against ASME was interesting because for the first time since the 1960s we saw, the student union and the academic union coming together, jointly protesting what had happened to us. This was the first time. That was a significant shift, if you want to talk about shifts that we have seen between the 1960s and the present period.
Alright, thank you Dr. Gomez for such a very interesting opinions on ethnicity and also student activism. So I believe Dr. Gomez and Dr. Kai mentioned something about the internal cohesion, and there is a possible friction between us and also the AP in terms of their vision and their opinions. So as an insider, working in party, working in Pakatan Rakyat, how do you see the internal cohesion of PAS and the AP and PKR, and especially after the MB Selangor crisis? And I believe many people are very interested on this issue.
I think DAP and PAS, the recent crisis will tell you, based on just reading the news, that the top leaders are really not talking about. Okay, because of that, the grassroots and the second level of that leadership, they all struggle as to how to move forward and what to say and all that. I will say in Selangor, Pakatan Rakyat's relationship used to be very close together, and I would say it depends on who is leading each component in the coalition. So we used to have Dr. Rani, who was the Selangor PAS Commissioner. He is the assemblyman for Meru. He's a medical doctor. Dr. Rani, if you know him personally, he's a very likable character. He talks a lot, he likes to make a lot of jokes, but he's also very close to the DAP leaders. So at that time it was Teresa Kok and Dr. Rani. Now you must remember there was the DUMC incident, if you remember the raid done by JAIS, and then there was also the Bible issue. But these two issues happened during different time, both under Khalid, but it happened when they had very different PAS commissioner. DUMC raid happened when Dr. Rani was PAS commissioner. Bible raid happened when YB Iskandar, he is still the Selangor PAS commissioner. YB Iskandar, unfortunately, he is an ex-co. He doesn't communicate much with the other component parties, PKR and DAP at the state level. So as far as I can remember, 2013 was our general elections, right? We've never had a meeting with the Selangor PAS commissioner, despite the Bible raid, that issue. But when the DUMC raid happened, the first thing that Dr. Rani and the rest did, that leadership, was to call up DUMC and have a closed-door dialogue immediately to resolve the issue. So I think a lot of times, while you're reading a lot of the open argument, is because there is no internal communication happening. They are not talking to each other, and that's why you get all the fighting outside. So again, like in every party, there are good leaders and there are not so good leaders. DAP the same, UMNO the same, PAS the same, PKR the same. In every party, in every family, you have the same problem. So I really think moving forward, the top leadership really have to sit down and talk it out. I know people are very frustrated, especially during the MB crisis, because UMNO is saying one thing, Hadi is saying another thing, the DAP is saying another thing, and the fact is there was very little communication. That has led to all that. The MB crisis, I think it was prolonged. In other states, even in UMNO states, you have the change of MB. Sometimes they try to change it very quietly and it's very fast and they just cut it and they replace. But Selangor one went on for a long time. And when we finally did it, I think people, by the time we changed Menteri Besar, people were very tired already. And everybody just wanted it to be resolved very, very quickly. And that's why I think until the end, a lot of people have no more energy left, even among the politicians, to continue fighting and to debate who is the better Menteri Besar. Is it Wan Azizah, is it Azmin? By the time Tuanku picked Azmin, everybody, including those in Pakatan Rakyat, wanted to move on with governance. And they know that if they can allow this to continue, nobody is going to vote for us anymore. So that's why conclusion, very little communication. Yeah, this is my personal opinion because it's recorded.
Another criticism that people always talk about when they talk about Pakatan Rakyat is that it's too Anwar-centric. That everything revolves around Anwar Ibrahim. I mean, we can understand that because he was the main figure from 1999 after Reformasi. But moving forward, what do you think about that opinion, that PR is too Anwar-centric? And your personal opinion, how would PR moving forward from this kind of stigma and opinion?
I think Dr. Charles said this before. Anwar Ibrahim is responsible for bringing Pakatan Rakyat together. We have to give him that credit because for the longest time the AP and pastors could not come together. But it was Anwar Ibrahim. After the release, Anwar managed to pull people together. Whether you like it or not, when you go into small kampungs ceramah, Anwar is still the crowd puller. People may criticize him in the media, but people will take the trouble to turn up at his ceramah and to listen to him. So I think Dr. Charles has said this also, that Malaysia is really not done with Anwar yet. Yeah. But if you want to imagine a future or how Pakatan would be without Anwar Ibrahim, I think the next state that you want to look at would be the Azmin Ali's administration in Selangor. That would really is very equal in terms of our seats allocation, 15 DAP, 15 PAS, 13 PKR, so very, very close together. That the model is quite similar. And if we end up in Putrajaya someday, you want to see how we govern you with Selangor. That's the closest model that you can see, whether you like it or not. Some of you may say, it's taking a long time for them to make a decision. That's because of this equal power sharing. So you have to consult one another, it takes more time. You compare with the Barisan Nasional with only one taikor saying, UMNO say something, MCA and MIC will not say anything. So it's faster that way for them to make decision. But is that good or not? There's a price you have to pay for democracy. And if you want equal power, then you have to listen to everybody before you make a decision. So I'll say definitely we still need Anwar Ibrahim. But it's unfair to say Pakatan Rakyat is all about Anwar Ibrahim because we do have the second level of leadership. People like Azmin, you can look at how Wan Yin governs Penang. And of course, you have the younger leaders that you can also look at. Yeah.
You mentioned something about the equal power sharing in the state assembly, like how the states are given proportionally. So, as your capacity, in your capacity as a speaker in the state assembly, what are the things? Because this is the second term for PR in Selangor. So, what are the things that you think PR has done differently than Barisan Nasional in governing Selangor, especially in the state assembly?
In the state assembly, when I inherited the state assembly from Datuk Teng Chakin, the former speaker, he has already put in place a few new reforms. For example, live telecasts of the sitting. He has formed select committees, the very powerful CELCAT committee. When I took over, I attended a speakers conference in Malacca. For the first time after a long time, all the speakers from other states are all meeting together. When I went there, I felt so out of place because the average speaker would be someone very senior, a Dato or a Dato Sri or a Tan Sri, very prominent politician in UMNO. Most of them are from UMNO and very senior in age. So I felt very out of place because I think in a lot of people's mind, even for the civil service, when they first announced this is the youngest woman speaker, this is the only woman speaker, a lot of people doubted, probably some still doubt, whether or not I could deliver. And because the expectation was very high to see whether I would survive or not. I took my term as a speaker very, very seriously because I know for a fact that in politics it's very competitive, and if you don't deliver, you'll be out, even within your own party. So you are racing against time to deliver and to have reforms. So I look at the reforms done by the former speaker and I was thinking, how can I actually consolidate those reforms, make it more permanent and not so discretionary based on what the speaker like or what the Menteri Besar like. And so one of the things, the biggest reform that we have managed to push through in the last November sitting was to change our standing orders. The standing orders are the Peraturan Tetap. That means this Peraturan Tetap govern what happens in the State Assembly, who can talk first, what happens to the select committees and all that. We changed the standing orders to make it compulsory in future. The opposition leader of the House must be elected as the chairman, appointed as the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee. In Parliament and everywhere else, you have the Chief Minister or the Prime Minister coming from UMNO. The Public Accounts Committee chairman also coming from UMNO. Now when that happens, sometimes there could be very little check and balance because they are all from the same party. And so to strengthen, to make sure there's proper check and balance, you really have to allow the opposition leader to lead the Public Accounts Committee, because Public Accounts Committee role is to investigate how taxpayers' money are being spent. Okay, so that's the reform we have pushed through. It doesn't matter if 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road in Selangor, who becomes government, it is protected in the standing orders that opposition leader must be the chairman of Public Accounts Committee. That's one. Number two is to make it compulsory. All State Assembly sitting must be broadcasted live, either on TV, internet, or whatever medium that you have relevant to that time. This is to ensure that no laws will be passed in secret anymore. There are a lot of enactment. If you go and study, you have no idea how it was passed, who voted for it, who you don't know whether your State Assembly person that you voted for turned up in the State Assembly, whether they are working or not, did they ever speak up, did they ever debate. So with this live telecast, it's going to be transparent. Nobody can, the Menteri Besar cannot one day say, sorry, I don't have budget for live telecast, we are going to do it in secret. So this will be done. This has already been made permanent. The other thing is also to set new standards to follow. When you have discretionary power for speaker, for example, the USOs will come to me, the motions, I can decide whether or not to allow the motions to be tabled to be debated. Now, you know, in Parliament, a lot of times the opposition criticize how they say their USO never saw the light of day. It goes into the speaker's chambers and just never tabled because they are all rejected. So I wanted to set a very healthy trend. I wanted Selangor to lead in terms of allowing motions to be debated in the House, whether it's coming from government or opposition, it should be allowed. And so when I allow an emergency motion by the opposition leader from UMNO. Selangor had a water rationing crisis, very serious. So the Selangor UMNO filed an emergency motion to debate, to ask the Menteri Besar to stop water rationing and to return supply back to the people. Now, emergency motion, very unlikely you get to see it pass. Why? Because you have to set aside all the agendas in the House, put everything aside and discuss just the emergency motion. Obviously, emergency motion will get a lot of publicity. Yeah. And at that time, I allowed that motion to be set aside. I allowed the motion to be tabled and to be debated, even though it's coming from the opposition leader. And then after that, we have a lot of other motions coming from UMNO. They filed a motion to discuss about Komango, the LGBT rights. You know, I allowed it because I was tired of this debate happening outside. I wanted to see whether or not people talking outside very loudly can do the same inside the House. And so I allowed it to be tabled and to be debated because I wanted debate to happen, because that's what elected reps have been elected for, debate. Now obviously when I allowed that, even my own PR reps criticized me. They say, you are just wasting time. Komango has no place in this State Assembly. It's not within our jurisdiction. Why did you allow it? So it's not easy to push through some of these things. And of course the most popular decision that was criticized a lot by the Chinese media especially was for me to allow a motion by UMNO calling for hudud to be studied in Selangor. The motion is actually worded like this: to menggesa kerajaan negeri untuk mengkaji kesesuaian pelaksanaan hudud di Selangor. So even if you pass it, right, it is a motion to study whether or not hudud is relevant. Now, at that time, again, I was tired of all the hudud thing happening outside. Let's debate it in the house and let's go for a vote once and for all. Because it would be interesting to see how UMNO would vote and how PAS would vote. I allowed it, and the Chinese media criticized me. They say, you're playing with fire. Yeah. But when I allowed that, the Barisan Nasional started fighting amongst them because they were not expecting me to allow it. They thought that I would reject it and then they can go to town and say, tengok speaker DAP anti-Islam. But when I allowed it, MCA started jumping, Gerakan started jumping at UMNO and said, why did you push for this in Selangor? And so, because of that pressure from within them, I received a note from the assembly person. He said, saya tarik balik. So it was never tabled because tarik balik. The other two sittings we had, very healthy trend I see. UMNO files usul, speaker allowed it, debated, and passed, even though they don't have majority in the House. Which means they filed an usul to debate on an issue, urging the Selangor state government to do something. Pakatan Rakyat Reps voted in favor of that usul together. That has happened twice. Yeah. So these are some of the reforms that are happening, but you don't read about it in the news because it's not sensational. But my hope as a speaker would be to set this kind of expectation and this kind of trend that is no longer foreign to pass an opposition's motion in the House. This is the place for all these things to happen, and hopefully other states will follow. Yeah.
So, in federalism, in theory, we are supposed to have federal government and state government who have equal sovereignty in terms of deciding certain things. So, in terms of state legislation, do you think there is a pressure from the federal government to the state legislation?
Actually, state has very little power. Our powers are really mainly dealing with land. So if you look at education, you look at welfare, healthcare, all these are really under the federal government. So as much as we like to change things, certain things you really don't have the powers to change it. If I want to change education system, but the schools are not under us. Of course, we have our state-owned institutions and we should start with that. But really, if you look at the larger picture, a lot of these laws, immigration laws, healthcare, they are all under federal government. So I really say that federal powers, too much powers are being parked at the federal level and the state. Yeah, even though there's a lot of traffic jam in Selangor, you want to do a lot of things for public transportation. Number one, you probably don't have the budget. You can only spend on studies, but to implement it statewide, very difficult. Yeah.
I mentioned the separation of power between federal and state because at least in the US they have a very clear line between federal power and state power, and it's also interesting to mention that at the federal level marijuana is not legal, but it's legal in Washington State, and they did it through a ballot initiative, which is to me is something new when I come here. So yeah.
We have the same problem in Malaysia. Aula can be used in Sarawak and Sabah, but in Peninsula you can't.
Okay, so that's all the questions that I have for the panelists. Now I'm going to open the floor for discussions and questions from the audience. We'll take 5 questions first, and then the panelists will answer it, and then we'll open for more questions after that.
PAS came into like a coalitional talks with UMNO, kind of like I think it came out in the media, and like a joint thing, like exploring the possibility of PAS joining, I think, the Barisan, and this kinds of like harks back into like the 1974 PAS entering the Barisan Nasional, which it eventually left. Maybe like if is then like any more like why PAS did it, and then why it failed, and what implications did it have for within like Pakatan, and what is it? Why did PAS do it, and what's in it for PAS to do it? And from then on, my next question will be what is it next for PAS, right? They look like traitors to me, like selling themselves, well, yeah, out. selling their souls and so on and so forth. So what's it for now? How does PAS stand now in the eyes of Pakatan, in Barisan Nasional, or in your eyes? And my second question is, so 2 years ago in my previous school, National University of Singapore, my professor, he invited the Duta Besar, the ambassador from Singapore, the Malaysian ambassador, and I asked the question that, so in the past 3 years, Najib has been going around, trying to fix the Patani Malays issue, trying to negotiate, and then he goes to southern Philippines and then he negotiates. So I asked the Duta Besar, do you think this was like a move to show up his Islamic base in 2013? I think he did it in like 2012, so it's like kind of preparing the ground to be seen as more Islamic, and then suddenly you see him going to Thailand, going to Philippines, and then the Duta Besar said, no, Malaysia has always been at the forefront of trying to be like a very like a activist Islamic state, and this is just like what Malaysia has been doing. But so my question was, yeah, but I mean, you see a spike in activity, trying to do the southern Philippines thing and the Patani Malays thing. So I would say it's obviously geared towards prepping for general elections in 2013, trying to show up the Islamic base. So maybe Prof. Gomez, you wanna like take that on, or maybe YB, Hannah, you, or even Dr. Kai?
Any more questions then?
Before I begin my question, I'd like to provide a little background on the basis of this question. Now, I grew up to a certain extent, you'd say whitewashed in a way. So what does that mean? Okay, it means I like my coffee black and my lemon white. But no, jokes aside, it means that I have a weak attachment to race, or in a way, a strong detachment to it. So now, the focus of Malaysian politics, with Pemandu as well, is that they focus on the people who can vote. And those people are usually older, much older than us. But as a youth, as someone who can't vote yet, one of the most important things is school and education. And one of the things we have in Malaysia is, of course, vernacular schools. Now, going back to May 13, that was, of course, the aftermath of that incident. Tukul Rahman said, okay, what you want? We give you vernacular schools for citizenship, right? Now, that's something I didn't agree with Tukul Rahman, because I see he was a bit of a pushover rather than being strict. Not because I'm racist, but I believe that he could have done something else that could have been more productive for the country. Now, vernacular schools, I would like to know where you stand on that as someone who actually represents our politics. Not because you're a Chinese or a Chinese Malaysian, but because you are already in the political system. Okay. And now, secondly, when it comes to vernacular schools, I want to know if it is a positive thing for us to have. And the way Mr. Charles said that, no, we Malays can't say, no, the Chinese and Indians can't have their schools. They need, we Malays, we have to accept that that's the thing, right? But the thing is, with Barisan being the way it is in Malaysia, and how we will never ever see vernacular schools away, I would want to know, in your opinions, Mr. Gomez, Mr. Kai, if it actually affects us as Malaysians, because it definitely affected me growing up, knowing that my children will also probably be in the same situation. So yeah, how does vernacular school affect this? And if it does affect this, is it positive, is it negative? From where I sit, it is a negative.
Hi, and my question is directed to anyone in the panelists. It really doesn't matter, but 50 plus years into Malaysia, and we like to tell ourselves that we're the melting pot of all the ethnicities and races, but the fact of the matter is, it's not. For the past 50 years, we've been slowly learning how to tolerate each other, but not integrate each other. It's just wherever you go. And the one thing I want to ask is, where do we start as a country moving forward towards bringing ourselves to a Malaysian national culture instead of, you are Malaysian, but you are Malay, Chinese, and Indian. So where can we start moving forward after that? That'll be all.
One more question, Sui.
I just want to ask about Sabah and Sarawak. So one of the things that Indonesia and Malaysia don't really get it with Sabah and Sarawak is that one of the main concerns is the 18-point and 20-point agreement. I just want to ask, how is it possible for Peninsula Malaysia to talk about these points with them? How do you come to a compromise to it? Because I think that one of the main issues that concern is not really the matters of Peninsula Malaysia, more really about the 18-point and the 20-point agreement. And I think that's important because Sabah and Sarawak is PM's fixed deposit. So, yeah, I just want to ask, how is it possible for them to have a compromise with Sabah and Sarawak for this kind of 18-point and 20-point agreement? That's all.
We'll get you next. Okay.
I have a three-part question, and I think it would sum up everyone's questions pretty well. So assuming that we have the same vision for Malaysia, and we're not going to go there, it's going to take a whole day. The first question is, what is the largest obstacle for each of you? You think that we are facing in achieving that same vision? The second question is, how is all this talks about politics, PKR, DAP, relevant to us who are non-politicians, who are not going to be politicians, who are not going to be political scientists? And the last question, what can we do as students in achieving or overcoming these obstacles?
Right, thank you. So we're going to let the panelists answer first.
I'll start with the vernacular school because I get that all the time. One of the two reasons why I joined politics, one is to fight corruption, the other is definitely to fight race-based politics. And when I tried to apply for my child's birth certificate, we come from mixed marriage, so we really wanted our child to be known as Malaysian instead of the stereotype of these three boxes. But we were not allowed because the Putrajaya said that their system is incapable of registering people outside of these three boxes. So every time I talk about fighting race-based politics, I will get asked, what are your views about vernacular school then? Let me just say that I don't know Mandarin. I tried taking up Mandarin lesson, but I failed. Few weeks I quit because it's just too difficult. If you ask a lot of parents who have sent their kids to vernacular school, they don't go in there because of the race. Because it's Chinese. They don't go to vernacular school because it's a Chinese school. A lot of them send their kids there because they perceive discipline to be greater there. Okay, that the kids are not allowed to play around. They take their lessons very seriously, and that they will excel in their maths and science. That's why a lot of people send their kids there. Don't forget that the registration for Chinese students have also increased in vernacular schools. So you see increase of Malay students, people graduating from vernacular school. Now, I would like to believe that if given the option, if our public schools, national schools are very, very good, I don't think anybody would want to send their kids to other schools. Now, we are not just looking at vernacular school as an alternative school. All over Subang Jaya, we are looking at private school, international school, even homeschool. Homeschool registration has increased greatly. Not because people like their kids to be in schools. I am a young parent. It's very expensive to send kids to private school. But because people have lost faith in the national school. Because they think that they are not getting quality education, like what Professor Gomez has said. Where are these educators coming from? What's happening? My batch, my teachers are different from the current batch of teachers, So because of that, when I campaigned outside of school in the last election, 2013, I expected a lot of parents. I expected to meet a lot of parents outside of this particular school in SS14, Subang Government School. But I was so surprised, that the intake has really dropped. I saw so little parents sending their kids to national school anymore. And I've met so many Malaysians, senior Malaysians in Vancouver. A lot of them tell me that the reason why they migrated was because of their kids' education. So I think if you really want to focus on uniting Malaysians, keeping them back in Malaysia, is to improve public schools and improve it in such a way that everybody wants to send the kids there because it's free. Of course, taxpayers have to pay tax, but still, I think there must be incentive for people to go back to government school. I've never been to vernacular school, so I can't comment on vernacular school. I don't know what's taught there, but I know that a lot of my classmates from vernacular school, they perform very well in science and maths. They're excellent in that, and I think it's strict discipline in those schools. If you want to talk about vernacular schools standing in the way of national unity, I think we shouldn't be fighting vernacular school. I think we should be fighting to abolish Biro Tata Negara first. This BTN has done more damage than any other courses in Malaysia. So if you want to look at stumbling block to national unity, let's examine what are the other things that we should first get rid of. Biro Tata Negara, race-based political parties. There's no point talking about national unity if you continue to allow race-based parties like UMNO, MCA, MIC. Every year, their AGM, they have to go back to their grassroots and say, this is what I will do to defend our race. Each party will have to do the same for them to survive their own party politics, party election. And with that kind of speech and with that kind of things being played out every year they have AGM, right? You're not going to get national unity because your core power is race-based. So you want to get rid of, if you want to really achieve national unity, start with these two, Biro Tata Negara and race-based political party. So that's my comment about vernacular school. I really think that parents should be given the option to send wherever they want to send their kids to, whichever school. If they want to study Mandarin, they should be allowed to, because it's up to the parents. Yeah, I don't think vernacular school is a stumbling block to national unity. I think they learn just different languages in those schools. Yeah.
Could you respond quickly to the question about what the role of ethnicity should be in Malaysia and how to form a Malaysian national identity? Now, there is no question that Malaysia is a multicultural, a multi-ethnic country. And there's no problem with that. Diversity is a wonderful and enriching thing. So when we talk about what a Malaysia should be and what the role of ethnicity within Malaysia should be, we shouldn't think about how to get rid of difference in society. Difference in society is not a problem. The question that should be raised is, what do we want ethnicity to be? Where do we want its limits to be? Should ethnicity determine everything about the type of life that somebody can live? The type of school they go to, the way they dress, the way they interact with others around them? Or should ethnicity be something that can be celebrated, but that isn't a constraint, that doesn't dictate, essentially, what the possibilities of somebody have, what possibilities somebody has in life? So, the first step towards that end is to have this discussion, to openly together in a room like this talk about what the role of difference, what the role of diversity in Malaysia should be, how the younger generation of Malaysians want to approach diversity, how they want to approach the relationships between different groups, between different religions, between different parts of the country, whether that's Sabah, Sarawak, and Peninsular Malaysia, or different states within Malaysia. The only route to making genuine progress towards some end is to have a discussion about what that end should be. At this point, that end is largely being dominated, being dictated by political parties, without sufficient input by especially the younger generation, you. Terence?
So let me start with the first question. When after the recent elections, us was very concerned of the decline of Malay Muslim presence in Parliament, and they felt that it was important if they formed a coalition with UMNO that the Malay Muslim majority in Parliament would be re-established. What is important here is that there were divisions in PAS about this idea, about the kind of politics of race and religion that they were advocating. In fact, the person who voiced protest against this was actually Nick Aziz. And Nick Aziz asked people like Hadi to remember what happened in 1974. In 1974, when UMNO was weak, they invited PAS to join. And then when UMNO strengthened itself, even Warren Kelantan, back in 1978, they got rid of PAS. So they said, UMNO is weak now, do not fall into this trap of joining UMNO. The consequences of this is that when they are strong again, they will get rid of them. And this is one of the reasons why this was prevented. So I'm going to put that in with regard to the first question. The second question, Najib's Islamic faith. One of the most interesting things that Najib introduced was the idea of moderation, moderate Islam. In fact, when he came to the United States, not long after he got appointed as Prime Minister, when he met Obama, there are two things he told Obama. First was, I've got a new model, a new economic model to deal with the global financial crisis, and Obama was very excited about it and wanted to learn from him about his new economic model. The second thing that he spoke was about moderate Islam, moderation, and this resonated well abroad, and this actually resonated well even in the country. The issue about vernacular schools. A study in the 1980s indicated that the number of students going to the Chinese schools was declining. A study showed that. But there was a spike after the 1990s. The reason for this increase in the 1990s is due to what Hannah just said. People were becoming disillusioned with the public school system, the quality of education had gone down, and that's why we see a revitalization of the vernacular schools. If the public education system had been sound, I think by now the vernacular schools would have been, probably would not even be like, having the numbers that they have now. The other issues about international schools, why did international schools come up? Because parents who had sent their children to the vernacular schools were not even happy with the kind of education they were getting there. Many of them were beginning to migrate abroad. The international schools was allowed for Malaysian students as a means to keep, especially the urban middle class, in Malaysia, because when the urban middle class moved abroad, including the young, they were not coming back. The third issue, which I want to discuss is, I want to address is the issue of Sabah and Sarawak. We have not treated Sabahans and Sarawakians well. And in the last election, when we look at how Pakatan drew up their manifesto, we were hoping to see something different there. But when I went into Sarawak and Sabah, they said that they were not happy even with Pakatan's manifesto, especially with regards to the oil revenues. Now it's 5% of oil revenues that goes only to Sabah and Sarawak. And interestingly enough, even though these two states are so rich in terms of resources, undersoil resources like oil and forestry, they are among the poorest states in the country. So how is that possible? They are not addressing the plight of Sabahans and Sarawakans enough. And this is interesting, even though PDP now is probably the second strongest party to the UMNO in the Barisan Nasional. So there's a serious problem with Sabah and Sarawak. Both coalitions have to address what's happening there and bring them into the equation a lot more. The issue about students' role, what can these students do? Let me tell you a story. In the 1980s, democracy began to emerge in East Asia. 1986 in the Philippines, and then subsequently soon after that, very soon after that, in Taiwan, in Thailand, and in South Korea. In all these countries, the democratization movement was led by university students with the middle class, but the university students were in the forefront. Around that period, the three states in Southeast Asia which had not democratized, Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia, the leaders the leaders became very worried and they began to talk about Asian democracy. And they said that we Asians, especially Malays, are very loyal to our leaders. The Chinese believe in fusionism and so on and so forth. In 1997, when we had the crisis in Indonesia, which led to democracy, it was led by university students. And in the Reformasi, there were a lot of university students involved, also in the Reformasi in Malaysia. So you can see here, after the Reformasi, nobody spoke about Asian democracy anymore. The point here I'm trying to make is that university students have always been in the forefront for democratization in East Asia and in Southeast Asia. Students have a big role to play. That is the reason why we are seeing the suppression of the students now. The suppression of the students and academics in the university has become extremely acute after 2013. It has become acute after 2013 because UMNO is very weak now. They have lost even the popular vote. In the peninsula, they got only 43% of the popular vote. They fear the young. The young can be a movement for change. So, in terms of students, what can they do? I think the students should work more with academics. They should form discussion groups. They should discuss problems. They should go back and get active in issues in Malaysia. And you don't necessarily be politics. You can also get involved in NGOs. NGOs have been in the forefront of a lot of change that we've seen occurring recently in Malaysia. So let me stop here and let's take more questions.
I think we'll just take 2 more questions. So
Hi, I'm not sure if you all are familiar with the concept of a third force in politics, which is championed by Raja Petra. But I just want to know, especially from the PR side, what do they actually think about the third force in politics? Like, what are their roles in society and our political system? Third force.
thank you, Suin. One last question. Adila.
Alright, I have a question to YB Hannah. So from 1990 to 2001, women in Malaysia actually overpassed men in the job sector. And of course, I think after 2003, there are the proposition of more balance between men and women. While before, women are really more than men in technical engineering, all this, which is we don't really see this this situation happening even in the United States, but it happens in Malaysia. So the recent policy by the EAP, of which the quota 30% for women, because I have this battle of whether do we really need women empowerment in Malaysia, because seeing at how even I totally I believe that most of us know on the fact that female students overpass men in terms of quantity in the public university, and to compare to perhaps United States itself, I think women in Malaysia are more equal in terms of opportunity and whatever it is. So do you think that the 30% quota is reflects something on the woman position in the politics, or maybe you have any other opinion or about women empowerment or the women in Malaysia?
Before that, so I'll let all the panelists answer the questions and give their final thoughts on this whole political things that are happening in Malaysia. So yeah, that is the final question. But if you have any other questions, you guys can meet the panelists after this. We have the room until 5:30, so feel free to stay around and ask the questions personally.
Okay. Third force first. What is the third force?
It is a political society that is an alternative to the two parties of PN and Pakatan Rakyat. So it started off as something as what Roger Becker wanted to do was offer suitable candidates to PR, since sometimes they say they don't have suitable candidates, but there are a lot of problems between the politics system, between PR and the third force, from what I can read from this blog. So what I have in mind is that we should have like, there are two dominant parties, but I'm interested in an alternate party, not an alternate party, but an alternate outlet other than these two parties.
Okay. Let me just say, to me, I think third force must be the people, okay, to compete, to hold these two people, these two parties accountable. Now, when you elect an elected rep, now again this is my personal opinion, when you elect an elected rep, the elected rep must be accountable first to their constituents who voted him in, or who voted her in, okay? When your elected rep does not belong to any party, okay, there is a problem. Because in a political party, we have what we call the disciplinary committee. So when the elected reps are actually not behaving, people can lodge a complaint to the party. The disciplinary committee will then call up this elected rep and check. My problem with independent is this: they are really not accountable to anybody. So if you don't like your elected rep halfway through the term, there's no one else you can turn to for discipline. You know, and I know there are people, there are independents who say, look, I just don't believe in party accountability. I don't believe in being accountable, or I'm not a team player. I have serious problem with candidates like this because politics is all about accountability. So you really have to think twice before going to the ballot box and electing an independent, because an independent simply means I'm not accountable to anybody, and that's my opinion. Okay. But again, like I say, in Malaysia, I really think that we are now struggling to even establish a two-party system. We are not even there. We don't even have a level playing field. So if we don't even have the second party in place, I don't know how the third force can successfully come in. So that's why you see nobody talks about third force anymore in Malaysia. About women, I really believe that let's just compare university. University, all girls get same education system, primary and secondary. So when they go into university, you don't need a quota system because the girls are fit enough to apply, they are qualified to enter. But when you come into politics and you talk about top positions, decision-making positions, it's very difficult for women who are married, who are mothers, to compete equally because they don't have the time to do that. So why the DAP has allowed this change in their constitution to say 30% of the highest decision-making body, which is the CEC, in DAP, must have 30% women. Okay, they have just changed the constitution simply because when you want to campaign to contest in the CEC, you have to go and make delegates all over Malaysia, all the DAP branches, you know. Now, a mother will probably not be able to travel so extensively like another single man who can go and compete and campaign. So because of that, you see not many women can afford to compete in the CEC. And because of that, they don't win, or they just cannot afford to be nominated or to contest in the first place. Because of that, they have to make certain adjustments to make sure that they are competing on level playing field, level playing ground, you know, so that they can enter. The same thing in the civil service. Women, generally in the civil service, you get a lot of women working, but top positions, very few. So that's why you have to allow this quota until people are familiar with decision-making level, where women can actually, you have more women in participating. Now, seats allocation in the past, a lot of times women are only given seats that they know they cannot win. So just to make you happy, just give you that seat, you know. But parties like the opposition parties, they have started to change that. So for example, DAP in Selangor, they have 15 seats. In the last round, they offered 30% to women. So we have 5 out of 15 women got the seats to contest. Even in the State Assembly of Selangor, we have 15 women. That's 20%, close to 30% representation. In the MMKM, which is the State Ministers lineup, out of 10, in the past, Tan Sri Khalid has given 4 to women. That's 40%. Why women need to be involved in politics? Because women legislate and govern quite differently. Women are less confrontational. So we are unlikely to take people to war. Okay, and because of our maternal instinct and all that, yeah, we just make different politicians. So that's why I would encourage women to enter politics, and you need more women. You need more women in politics in Malaysia, but you can only see that happening in the opposition party, unfortunately. PKR and DAP especially, you get a lot of women going in and they get top positions. So like Teresa Kok, Nurul Izzah, Wan Aziza, you know, top positions, yeah.
Thank you very much. Dr. Kai, any final thoughts?
So just to follow on what Fabian said, the playing field in Malaysia is in many respects not equal. It's not equal in terms of access to office, it's not equal in access to resources, it's not equal in access to the media. Because of these inequalities, it's very difficult to effect deep change through the ballot box alone. So the question is how change might occur. RSN has very few incentives to do this unilaterally because it benefits them. Pakatan Rakyat can't push new change entirely on its own, even if it was unified in which direction it should move. The only way to affect any real far-reaching change is to have a dialogue, to make sure that some of the most pressing issues in Malaysia are part of the national discussion, that they are not something that are swept under the rug or that only the media addresses in a very biased and one-dimensional manner, but rather that there is a national conversation about much of what needs to be addressed in Malaysia. I've got nothing to add on top of the gender issue because I don't think there are many people in Malaysia or anywhere in North America, frankly, who are more qualified to speak on that than she is. I'll leave it with her.
Are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Do you want to answer the question, or do you have any final thoughts that you want to say to us?
I'd like to say a few words on the third force. In the run-up to the 2013 election, the discussion of the third force emerged. It emerged because by that time already many people in the electorate were worried about the kind of politics that was going on even in the Pakatan Rakyat. One politician who actually tried to forge a new party was, in fact, he did it very quietly, but he tried to do it. It was Tunku Razali Hamzah. But it didn't work because the kind of things that he was talking was also highly divisive. So the people who were part of the discussion were not comfortable with what he was saying. Now this brings me to an important point, the issue of generational change. If we look at the kind of political discourses that are going on in the parties, both in the Pakatan Rakyat as well as the Barisan Nasional, these discourses are of the type that we used to hear from the 1970s, 1980s. They have not changed at all. The time has come for a new kind of discourse because the parties seem to be caught in a time warp. Society has moved on, society is asking for change, but the parties refuse to change. Now, having said that, I must say something here too about refusal to change. In 2004, when the opposition got decimated by the Barisan Nasional, Keadilan had, I think, only Wan Aziza in Parliament and passed it very badly. DAP also did very badly. It was a real low point for the opposition. At that point, in 2004, a group of young people, young politicians, people like Teresa Kok,
Thank you, Dr. Kai. Dr. Gomez?
Keadilan and Syed from PAS. A group of them came together and they went to Polixen and they talked a lot now about the Polixen meeting. the gathering of young politicians and politics to talk about a new kind of politics. And at that point in time also, we began to see a change in terms of how they began to address the young. In fact, the DAP began to go all out after that to get the young into politics, into the DAP. That was an important change because I still remember in 2004 when we were discussing politics, we said the DAP is finished. Kadelan is out, it can't last much longer. So the reform that began to happen was actually attributable to young politicians in the opposition. We cannot deny that. Today, if you look at Kadelan and if you look at DAP, they comprise a lot of young people who were brought in after that time. Now, this suggests that the young can be a force for change. They've already proven it. They can be a force for change. The problem, however, is that these parties are still led by the old guard. If you look at PAS, if you look at Kadelan, and even if you look at the DAP, I would argue that the old guard has to leave in all three parties, and this new young generation waiting in the wings should really come forth and take charge. Then we'll probably see a new kind of politics, and then we will probably see less discussion about the third force. Having said all that, let me say now that the discussion about the third force is still in force. I can tell you now, recently when I was back in Malaysia, I was called for a meeting where they were talking about the third force. This time it's going to be a force comprising parties of the left. The Party Socialist, Party Rakyat, they're all talking about coming together and forming a new left movement. There are talks in NGOs that they should form a new movement, that NGOs may are thinking now becoming more active in politics. So what this means is that in society itself, there's a great disillusionment with both Pakatan and with Barisan. They are both seen as dysfunctional coalitions. And these two dysfunctional coalitions are now governing in the country. I think the rise of the third force is good because, as Hannah says, it will be a discipline on the Pakatan Rakyat. But I'm not going to end on an idea of contestations here. I'm going to end on the idea of hope. That hope coming, I feel, mainly because the young are becoming more involved in politics, the young are becoming more vocal in their politics. We see it here, we see it also in the University Malaya, the young are becoming extremely vocal now. And that means the trend suggests there's reason why we can hope that Malaysia is going to become a much better place politically, even though we are very depressed with the current situation now in the country. Let me end there.
This is just my final note to all the students here. Never say politics is not for you. Because if people like me without political background can come in and do reform in whatever limited space I have, surely a government scholar or someone like you who is studying here in this university can do so much more. There are a lot of wrong people in politics for the wrong reasons. Not every politician is in there for reforms. Many people go in there to enrich themselves or to get contracts for family and friends. But if you, the good people, stay out of it, nothing is going to change. And watching from afar is not enough. And saying that, doing this will not please my parents is also not good enough. I think it's time that you stop doing things for your parents, the past generation, but you have to start deciding and doing things for your future children. I don't hear enough of young people talking about doing things for their children, but they say, this is what I should do for my parents' sake. You cannot look back, you have to move forward and shape the kind of Malaysia you want for your kids. And also, please do not operate out of fear. Malaysia has been paralyzed because of fear. Fear that they'll do this to you, fear that they'll do this to you. Let me just tell you, I've been in government for 6 years now. I don't think they are that advanced. I don't think they spy on you all the time. I don't think they know who you work for or who you're seen together with, attending this talk, what will they do to me and all that kind of thing. Please don't operate out of fear because you are sent here to be empowered to think for yourself. And people like you need to go home. Really, you need to go home, enter politics and change the course of the nation. If you just sit back, the wrong people are making decisions for you. There are many wrong people in politics who are not interested in reform. Yeah.
Thank you.